Guys, it's Miss Fogarty. Today I'm going to be reading to you lesson number 7, Martin Luther King Jr., Defender of the Dream. When I'm reading today, there are going to be 5 vocab words that we're listening for. The first vocab word is the word activists. Activists are people who take some kind of action to achieve a goal. So Susan B. Anthony led a determined group of women rights activists, people fighting for a goal. The second vocab word is banned. To be banned means to be prohibited or stopped from doing something. Unfair laws were banned in the United States, so they were stopped or prohibited. The third vocab word is character. This word character means qualities or traits that make up and distinguish a person. So if you are a kind person, that is part of your character. If you are a stubborn person, that is part of your character. So they're qualities or traits that describe your personality. The fourth vocab word is minister. A minister is a person who works for a church and performs religious functions and duties. And the last vocab word is a sit-in. A sit-in is a non-violent protest that involves a person or people sitting down or occupying specific locations. We're going to read about all 5 of those vocab words today. If you hear them while I'm reading, if you tap your head, that tells Miss Fogarty that you are understanding the word, you're listening for it, and you caught it. All right, here we go. This picture on my screen is of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He should look very familiar. As a young African-American boy growing up in the South, Martin Luther King Jr. witnessed and experienced discrimination. Martin knew that it was unfair and it made him feel sad. As a young boy, he could not have known that he would grow up to become one of the most famous and respected civil rights activists and leaders in American history. In his short life, he would challenge discrimination and change laws and attitudes. He would bring people of all races together, and this nation would become a better place because of him. So he's an activist. He's someone who's fighting for a group of people. This is Dr. Martin Luther King's childhood home. Martin was born in 1929 in Atlanta, Georgia. Martin had an older sister, Willie Christine, and a younger brother, Alfred Daniel. He lived in a loving home with his parents, his brother and sister, and his grandparents. Martin's father, Martin Luther King Sr., was the pastor of an Ebenezer Baptist church in Atlanta. Martin was a member of his father's church. Does anyone remember who this lady is? This is Miss Rosa Parks. Martin Luther King Jr. is in the background. Just like Rosa Parks, Jackie Robinson, and Mary Bethune, Martin was born during a time when African American people in the United States did not have equal rights. Segregation kept people apart and prevented African Americans from being full and equal members of society. So remember, segregation means separate. So there was a lot of laws in place that kept people apart, and Martin Luther King worked to fix that. Martin was a very intelligent boy. He began attending school when he was 5 years old. He was a student at an elementary school. After elementary school, Martin attended Booker T. Washington High School in Atlanta. Because he was such a good student, Martin got to skip 2 grades. At just 15 years of age, Martin became a student at Morehouse College. Students usually start college at the age 17 or 18, so he started a little bit earlier. So he was pretty young to be out of college. At first, Martin considered becoming a doctor or a lawyer, but he later changed his mind and decided to become a minister like his father and his grandfather before him. Remember, he became a minister. That's someone who works for a church and performs religious functions and duties. After graduating from Morehouse College, Martin attended Crozer Theological Seminary, where his studies prepared him for his work as a minister. Martin completed his education at Boston University. He received his doctorate degree when he was just 25 years old. Very smart man. Martin had not only gained a doctorate in Boston, he had also gained a wife, a beautiful young lady named Coretta Scott. Coretta had been studying music at the New England Conservatory in Boston. Upon receiving his doctorate, Martin and Coretta moved to Montgomery, Alabama, where he became the minister of the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church. Martin was now ready to begin the career that he had long prepared for. So this is a picture of him and his wife. This should look familiar. We saw it during the Rosa Parks read aloud. This is a recap of Rosa Parks sitting on the bus. Remember, she is the lady right here sitting alone. If you notice, she's in a section of white people. Back in this time, African American people were expected to sit in the back of the bus, and Rosa Parks sat down right in the middle of the white folks and refused to stand up and got sent to jail for it. As a young teenager riding city buses in the South, Martin was experienced in the same discrimination that Rosa Parks had experienced. African Americans had to sit at the back of the bus, and if the bus was full, the driver would ask a person of color to stand up so that a white person could sit down. Martin thought that that was humiliating, and so, as well as being a pastor in Montgomery, Alabama, Martin decided that he would become a civil rights activist. When Rosa Parks challenged racial segregation in the Montgomery city bus system and a bus boycott began, Martin was asked to be the leader of that movement. So remember that boycott, when people joined together and said, you know what happened to Rosa wasn't fair, we're going to refuse to ride the buses. So that's what a boycott was. Martin joined Rosa Parks' bus boycott. The African American community stood together under his leadership. They refused to ride the buses until they were able to choose wherever they wanted to sit without being told that they couldn't sit there. The boycott lasted more than a year. People walked, rode bicycles, and rode in carpools to get to work. Martin led the boycott. Martin and his fellow activists were threatened and intimidated, but they did not back down. Finally, the United States Supreme Court, the most powerful court in the country, ruled that bus segregation was illegal and had to stop. At that moment, Martin became one of the most important people in the American civil rights movement. In fact, Martin became its leader. So I want you guys to be thinking, how are African Americans feeling when bus segregation was finally declared to be illegal or against the law? They're probably feeling very happy because they fought for something and finally the court system said, you know what, that isn't fair. It doesn't matter what your skin color is to where you sit on a bus. That has nothing to do with each other. Martin was prepared to be the leader of the civil rights movement even though he knew he was putting himself and his family in danger. Remember, Martin's challenging people. There's a lot of people down south that said, you know what, blacks and whites should be separate, segregation. Martin was fighting for the opposite of that. He said, no, it doesn't matter what your color is. We should be able to eat in the same restaurant, sit wherever we want on the buses, go to the same schools with whites and blacks. And people were threatening him and they were trying to get him to stop because they liked the way that things were. For his part, despite the dangers, he insisted that those involved in the civil rights movement remain peaceful and never use force. Martin believed that an organization, non-violent movement that protested against inequality with thoughtful words, not fists and guns, would be more successful. He admired those who use nonviolence to protest. So there's going to be a lot of people that are going against what Martin thinks, so he can choose to fight physically, get into fights with his hands, his fists, to use weapons and guns, but he says that's not going to solve anything. I'm going to do things in a peaceful way to get my point across. Martin and 60 other ministers and activists founded the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. This was an excellent way to organize members of the African American churches throughout the country. They worked together to try to bring about social changes that would improve the lives of Americans. He also set out to register African Americans in the South to vote so that they could use their power to vote and bring about change. In his first speech to his group, Martin said, "We have no alternative but to protest. For many years, we have shown great patience. We have sometimes given our white brothers the feeling that we liked the way we were being treated. But we come here tonight to be saved from that patience that makes us patient without anything less than freedom and justice." And so it began. African Americans living in the southern states where segregation was legal began to protest. Young African American students began to hold sit-ins at lunch counters that would not serve them. So remember, we talked about how segregation, keeping blacks and whites separate, there were only certain restaurants that African Americans could go to. There were white restaurants and African American restaurants. And a group of African Americans would do a sit-in where they went into a white restaurant and they just sat at the counter. And the white folks refused to serve them because they said, you can't come here. We only serve white people. They didn't use weapons. They didn't use guns. They just sat there. And they said, nope, we're going to change it one way or another. Many people of different races supported this civil rights movement. People rode buses from state to state and protested in places that practiced segregation. Over and over again, they sat in at these lunch counters, waiting rooms, and college campuses. Many people were arrested for taking part in these protests. Martin and his family moved to Atlanta, where he worked with his father at the Baptist Church. Both Martin's father and his grandfather were ministers who had, during their lifetimes, worked for equal rights for African Americans. The civil rights movement kept going. Martin and others continued to demonstrate peaceful and led marches. During one demonstration in Birmingham, Alabama, Martin was sent to jail. He wrote a famous letter, the letter from the Birmingham jail. In this letter, he explained that it was his views that whereas just or fair laws must be obeyed, unjust or unfair laws like segregation should be ignored. The following year, Martin led a march on Washington, D.C., the pressure of the government into changing segregation laws in the South. More than 200,000 people walked to this monument to listen to his speech. There in front of the memorial, Martin delivered his famous "I Have a Dream" speech. He said that he hoped for a day where people would not be judged by the color of their skin, but the content of their character. So I'm not going to tell you you can't sit here because you're a different color than me. I'm going to judge you based on how kind of a person you are or how mean of a person you are, rather than the color of your skin. Later, Martin was given one of the highest awards that anyone can achieve, the Nobel Peace Prize. With this award came $54,000 in prize money, in which he donated to a number of civil rights activist groups. Martin also often felt threatened. He often feared for his own safety and that of his family. In his lifetime, Martin was jailed over 30 times, but he was a peaceful warrior who fought these words. Sadly, in 1968, this courageous man was killed. This terrible tragedy happened in Memphis, Tennessee. Martin had gone to the city to support workers who were not being treated fairly. Martin seemed to have had a feeling that he would not live to see the changes he wanted. The night before he died, Martin told a crowd gathered to hear him speak, "I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know that tonight we, as a people, will get you to that promised land." So Martin was constantly being threatened because he was trying to change something that was not wanted by a lot of people. So he had a feeling that something bad would happen to him, but he didn't care. He wanted to stand up and fight regardless of the threats. Because of Martin Luther King Jr. and all the people involved in the civil rights movement, a law passed called the Civil Rights Act that banned or said that segregation was now illegal. This was followed by a law called the Voting Rights Act, which removed any restrictions on the right to vote for African Americans. Martin Luther King Jr. had led the way for a better, brighter future for all people. Almost 25 years after his death, the United States Congress passed the third Monday in January to become a federal holiday in Martin's honor. On this day, we remember the extraordinary man for all that he achieved. This day is now celebrated as a national day of service where all people are encouraged to find ways to help others, just as Martin did during his lifetime. There's also a monument not far from the Lincoln Memorial where he delivered his famous "I Have a Dream" speech. It opened to the public in August of 2011. It's the first monument on the mall to honor an African American. The young boy who experienced discrimination grew up to become a national hero.